night with first-round games, it really looked like, especially at halftime, that Vanderbilt might have that one in the bag. They came out with their hair absolutely on fire, had a 14-point lead at the half, and, playing in Nashville, home venue, a lot of fans on their side. Obviously, Arkansas has not had a great season up to this point. You thought, man, this maybe Vanderbilt's going to be the hot team in this tournament. Maybe they're going to be worrisome coming into tomorrow's game against South Carolina. But Arkansas, give them credit, came alive in that second half. 51 points. Banked 4 3-pointers, 2 of those from Tremont Mark, who ended up scoring all 18 of his points in the second half. So a big, a big help there from an offensive standpoint. But defensively, they started pressing a little bit more, starting adding a little bit more pressure to Vanderbilt, a team that's not necessarily the fastest one in the entire nation, but they play at a decent tempo, and Arkansas employed a little bit more of a pressing defense to try and capitalize on that a little bit. In addition, or as a result of that, I guess is the best way to say that, they started capitalizing on turnovers as well. Vanderbilt had 6 turnovers in that half, which led to 10 points there by Arkansas. Which, again, when you're talking about a game that ends up being decided in overtime, those points very, very huge. And from an offensive standpoint, Arkansas also cut down on their own turnovers, going from 8 in the first half to only 2 in the second half. So a lot of little adjustments being made at halftime of that game that certainly helped Arkansas storm back in the second half. Game was tied with a last-second shot in regulation, and then Arkansas controlled most of overtime. We'll go to cut number 18 here, Dave. This is Eric Musselman after the game talking about using that extended defense to dictate the tempo against Vanderbilt in the second half of the game.
I just think that, you have some decisions to make on what type of pressure you want to do. And, we haven't done it much this year. So, how the game unfolds tomorrow, I really don't know. Obviously, none of us know. We had guys play extended minutes, obviously. So we'll dive into the film tonight and see what, we don't have a long time to do a prep. Obviously, we won't have a shoot-around tomorrow, and they will not be on their legs in the gym anywhere to walk through anything, so it's going to have to be a really solid walkthrough in a ballroom, much like, an NBA team might do on back-to-back nights. So, we have to get ready. We've done a good job preparing for teams when we play them a second time or a third time, and, hopefully, we come up with something slightly different than what happened at Bud Walton, because if we do what we did in Bud Walton, we will not win the game. Pretty simple.
And that's something important to note there, as he talked about, it's a very quick turnaround for Arkansas, and that's the benefit of a team like South Carolina that has a bye in the tournament. Now, you would have loved a double bye where you're not even having to play today and only worrying about having to play tomorrow, but the fact that you get at least one more day's rest compared to an Arkansas team that, for one, played a late game. That game tipped off at 7 o'clock last night, did not wrap up until after 9 o'clock, in addition to the fact that they played overtime. That's 5 more minutes of basketball, extra minutes on all those main starters there for Arkansas that, could be a little bit more worn out today. Or you mentioned they're not going to have the shoot around. They're not going to have the ability to sit down and prep for a game like they normally would. So hopefully that plays in the benefit of South Carolina, with Arkansas having to make that very quick turnaround. This is a South Carolina team that went in to Bud Walton earlier this year and won by 13, although back in January. And that was a point in time we didn't really know what Arkansas was. We talked about them from the standpoint of, they got off to a slow start, lost a couple games early in conference play, but just wait. As they do every single year, seemingly under Eric Musselman, they hit their stride and reel off a bunch of conference wins in a row. That did not happen for them this year. They have had wins, but they've been sparing and a lot harder to come by. But of those wins, I think it is pretty interesting to note, they have a much better track record the second time when they see a team. Arkansas only has 6 conference wins from the regular season, and then you add a 7th last night, technically speaking, though it doesn't count towards the record, against Vanderbilt. When you look back at what Arkansas has done this year, those 6 wins all are against teams that they've played twice this year. So they swept Texas A&M, who's the team that they played right before South Carolina, and that was their first conference win of the season. Swept A&M by beating them before South Carolina, and then beating them in the middle of February as well. Missouri, another team that they swept in late January, as well as a little over about 2 weeks ago at the end of February. Georgia, a team that they had lost to in their second conference game of the season, bounced back and picked up a win against them on February the 10th. And then LSU, a team that they also lost to at the beginning of February, they bounced back with a pretty sizable win by 11 points there at home in their penultimate conference game just last week, as a matter of fact. And then Vanderbilt, a team that had just beaten them a few weeks before, 85-82 at Bud Walton Arena, bounced back last night and picked up a victory against them. So when you look back at this game all the way back in the middle of January, where South Carolina beat them by a score of 77-64. A lot's changed with both these teams since then. But again, Arkansas just has a really good track record of matching up with opponents a second time. Look, Eric Musselman is a very, very good coach. A lot of success, not only his time at Arkansas, but going back to his time at Nevada as well. So if you're going into this thinking that they're going to be able to pull off another double-digit win with ease, certainly think again, because again, this is an Arkansas team that has the capability of really making you sweat when it all comes down to it. Coach Paris, yesterday after practice, even reflected back a little bit, cut number 4 here, Dave, to that game against Arkansas earlier on this season.
I thought we played well in that first game. I thought we got off to a good start, and we continued it pretty much throughout the game. I don't remember the specifics, but I think we led almost the entire game, if not the entire game. And they're really talented. But yeah, you get so caught up in watching and preparing for these other games that I hadn't done a lot of Arkansas related stuff until just recently. I've done a little bit just in terms of watching our last game with them, our last game with Vandy, and then trying just to prepare our team. We spend most of our time on our own stuff. I've always said that 90% of our game plan is based on what we do, and then that other 10% that relates to them, 90% of that has to do with personnel. And so then the rest is just a couple wrinkles, actions that a team likes. But so we've been spending a lot of time on us. But I remember when we played well that game.
And that was a game that South Carolina won by 13, as I mentioned, back at Bud Walton Arena in January. It was also a game where South Carolina held Arkansas under 40%, from the field, under 30% when shooting from three, and most importantly, won off the glass pretty handily in that game. And that's going to be a big factor once again today, is certainly winning those rebounds for South Carolina. That was a game that Colin Murray-Boyles had 11 points, 4 rebounds. B.J. Mack, great game for him, 18 points and 9 rebounds. Zachary Davis at that point in time, because remember, they were playing without Miles Studi as he'd been injured just a couple of games before. Grabbed 12 points and 4 rebounds, and Michi Johnson, 8 points and 7 rebounds himself, just to name a few. So a lot of contribution across the board in that game. Talon Cooper also had 11 points, went 3 of 3 from beyond the arc in that one. So the contribution was kind of spread out pretty evenly across those teams we've seen so many times this year. But again, this is an Arkansas team that is much different and much better than they were back in January in a lot of respects. And also, you can't overlook the fact that Eric Musselman is just a very, very good tournament coach. Look at last year's team that was under 500 in the SEC, took them all the way to the Sweet 16, went to the 2 Elite Eights before that. So a track record of success when it comes to tournaments, and Arkansas, knowing its back is up against the wall, having to run through this SEC tournament to have any shot of making it to the NCAA tournament, they're going to be throwing the kitchen sink at them. And we'll see what happens. Again, coming up today at 3:30, pregame coverage starting at 3 o'clock right here on The Game. With talking about South Carolina starting its postseason, I want to pose the question of, what are you expecting over not only this weekend, but the next couple of weeks when it comes to South Carolina playing postseason basketball? We'll dive into that coming up. Real quick, I want to remind you that coming up on Saturday, have the St. Patrick's Day celebration out in 5 Points, going to be going on all day long. Myself and Bill Gunser will be out there. I believe we're going to be in the area. Trips Cleaners, I believe is what I was told. So come out and see us. Going to have some stuff to give away and just hang out as well. So again, that's coming up Saturday out in 5 Points, the St. Patrick's Day celebration here in Columbia. More conversation about men's basketball as they head into postseason play. Coming up, it's the halftime show. Tyler Head along with you flying solo today until 3 on the game. Welcome back in. It's the halftime show. Tyler Head flying solo with you on this Thursday afternoon. Beautiful Thursday, by the way. Had a chance to be outside for a few minutes as I was making the drive over from the Main Street Firehouse Subs to here back in the Herndon Chevrolet Studios. Absolutely gorgeous. I think it's going to touch 80 today. And hey, I am all for that. I am ready for spring to officially get here. I'm sick of wearing jackets and being stuck inside cold all the time. So a welcomed addition as we get closer and closer to the official start of spring. What, I guess in like a week's time, I guess. I think it's March 21st, if I'm remembering correctly off the top of my head. But with spring, of course, comes plenty of college basketball, and we are truly at the beginning of March Madness right now with the conference tournaments in full swing. Many of them started this past weekend with a lot of the mid-majors and, of course, the power conferences in action through this weekend, where South Carolina will be in action, of course, taking on Arkansas today at 3:30. And what a whirlwind of a week it's been for South Carolina, completely off the court. Of course, that's being headlined by Lamont Paris getting his contract extension just a couple of hours ago through the 2029-2030 season, worth more than $4 million annually, which I think is justified compensation for what he's been able to do so far. He also won AP Coach of the Year, SEC Coach of the Year, excuse me, earlier on this week, in addition to having already won the SEC Coach of the Year last week, I guess it was. So racking up the awards in addition to racking up a new contract here in just a couple days' time, and has, I think in everybody's opinion, has a very good shot at being the National Coach of the Year. I think I've heard his name and Dan Hurley from UConn's, being touted as the top two candidates there. So it could be a dead heat, but my vote will go for Lamont Paris just on what he's been able to do in a second-year turnaround here at South Carolina. And it's not just him. Look at Talon Cooper, Meechie Johnson, both named to a second-team All-SEC earlier on this week. And Colin Murray-Boyles, no surprise, being named to the All-Freshman team. And this is good momentum. All this is positive vibes, the whole 9 yards, which is good to have going into a tournament like South Carolina does, one there where there's really not a lot of pressure on them. And I don't say that from the standpoint of, they're not going to care, and if they go out there and lose today, they'll say whatever, it's not a big deal. No, they still want to win all these games and ultimately take home a trophy when the weekend's said and done. But the fact that for the first time in years, they go into this tournament not having to win. Not saying, all right, guys, well, if you want to play the NCAA tournament, we got to win 3 games this weekend against, some of the toughest teams in all of college basketball. That's not there. And again, I don't want to see them get bounced. I don't think anybody wants to see them get bounced, especially not today. But if they did, they would still be playing in the NCAA tournament, maybe as like a 6th seed, because you might fall down a little bit. But for the most part, pretty secure with where they're at overall, which is certainly a good thing. I want to pose this question to you, the listeners, and please let me know on our Firehouse Subs text line 803-404-6100. What is your level of expectation for this team as they begin postseason play? Because I think we've all tried to live in that moment, right? We've all tried to soak in everything that was happening and try and truly appreciate what the season has been and worry about the stuff that is off in the distance whenever we get there. That being future games and tournaments and all that kind of stuff as we're progressing through the regular season. But now that we're in tournament play, SEC first and the NCAA tournament, I think it's a rightful question to ask of where do you expect this team to go? What will be acceptable for you? What will be unacceptable? If South Carolina lost today and then got bounced in the first round of the NCAA tournament, would that sour the entire season for you? Because we had that great regular season, but for what? We didn't do anything with it. Or is it a situation of, hey, they made the NCAA tournament, I'm good with that, and anything past that is gravy? And I feel like I'm going to get some differing answers on this because everybody kind of has different standards for what, for what that level of expectations are. And again, going back to the beginning of the regular season, before the season even started, the projections, nobody had South Carolina even sniffing the NCAA tournament. So I think if you would have gone to a lot of Gamecock fans back in October and said, hey, I can guarantee you right now this team's going to be the NCAA tournament, and I can guarantee you nothing past that. I think everybody would have collectively said, yeah, I'll take it. That sounds fantastic, especially from where we thought this team was going to be in 2023 and 2024. But now that you're in the moment of actually being at the precipice of conference play, it's like, well, now I want a little bit more. I don't want to just make the tournament. I want to advance in the tournament. I want to go to the round of 32. I want to go to the Sweet 16, the Elite 8, maybe even make another Final Four run, which is, there's nothing wrong with expecting that if that's what you think, because this team has shown the capability of playing with and beating just about everybody that's been thrown their way. If South Carolina wins today, they get Auburn tomorrow in the quarterfinals. And yes, Auburn drug them at Neville Arena a couple weeks back by 40 points. Despite that, if South Carolina matches up with them tomorrow, I'd sit here and pretty confidently say, yeah, I could see how South Carolina could win that game because they've shown you that ability. Yes, they've had bad nights like that night at Auburn, like blowing the lead against LSU, when they couldn't make free throws against Georgia earlier on in the season. That does not mean that they are immune from having bad games and looking bad at times, but this team's also had the goods outweighed the bad this season. Kentucky, the first game against Tennessee, even the first half against Alabama, which I don't think many people were expecting them to hang in there with them. Now, of course, it went off the rails there in the second half, but regardless, they showed you the ability that they can at least hang with them for a while. So I don't think anything's off the table with this team. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say with a straight face that I think they're going to go to the Final Four. I think maybe 1 or 2 wins in the tournament is certainly reasonable. If you got to a Sweet 16, it's like, that's fantastic. Bring it on. I'm not saying hang a banner in Colonial Life Arena, but it's something that would be celebrated quite a bit. Maybe not in the same way as the Final Four run was a couple years ago, because that was very much unexpected based on the engagement I've gotten from some of you in the listening audience, up to this point. But you can make any kind of run in this tournament. I think that'll satisfy most people. Now, there are some people out there that are going to say national championship or bust, and if they don't win it all, then it was worth nothing. And if that's your opinion, that's okay. I don't believe in that kind of thing. I do think you have to kind of adjust expectations, based on where you're at, what you've done this season, and opponents and all that kind of stuff. So, could South Carolina win it all? Sure. Do I expect them to? I don't. But again, they've surprised us plenty more times this year. But getting back to the main point, it's so refreshing to be able to go into the SEC tournament in Nashville and not have to look at it as a stressful, oh my God, if we don't win 2-3 games, then we're out and that's it. The season's over. You'd like to win some games, maybe bolster your resume a little bit more. Maybe you can slide up to a 4 seed. South Carolina's consistently been sitting right around 5 for a while now. Your last opportunity to move up is by seemingly at least making it to the conference championship game. Can they do it? Sure. Will they do it? I don't know. We're going to have to wait and see. This is a team that truly takes it one game at a time, and I feel like as an audience, we should do the same. Well, we can't get too far ahead of our skis because the team isn't looking at that. And the team is attacking each game head on, and I firmly believe that, as cliche as 1-0 every single game sounds, I really think that's the approach this team is taking. And it's worked out well for them so far this season. But again, I'm interested to know what your thoughts are. 803-404-6100. We will get to some of those a little bit later on. Our guy Elijah Campbell is out at the SEC men's tournament, going to be checking in throughout the entire weekend. We'll talk to him coming up next, get his thoughts on this afternoon's matchup between the Gamecocks and the Razorbacks. That's all coming up. It's the halftime show. Tyler Head along with you, flying solo until 3 here on The Game.
A lot different, but actually as I was just walking through the little tunnel or whatever, I can feel the goosebumps of being sent home. So it feels good. I'm excited and ready to play for real.
Welcome back in. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head flying solo up until 3 o'clock, leading you right into pregame coverage of Gamecock basketball against that take on Arkansas today at the SEC tournament. That was Meechie Johnson yesterday after practice talking about the feeling of returning to Bridgestone Arena as a contender compared to where they were a season ago coming into the SEC tournament, then knowing they had to pretty much run the gauntlet if they wanted any shot of making the NCAA tournament. That obviously didn't end up happening, but this year is a much different story. Bringing in now our guy Elijah Campbell, who is on the scene up there in Nashville at the Bridgestone Arena, getting set for game number 1 coming up here in about half an hour's time between Mississippi State and LSU. Elijah, hearing, and you were there, talking to the coaches and the players after that game, the mindset of this team as they do come back to Nashville, a complete 180 from where they were a season ago, knowing no matter what happens this weekend, they're locked into the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, I mean, in the clip you played with Meechie, he's talking about walking around and kind of reminiscing last year about, that was going to be their last game if they lost. There was a lot riding with that Ole Miss game last season where they played on that Wednesday night because there was no NIT chance, there was no NCAA tournament chance. So for some of the seniors like Hayden Brown and guys who are out of eligibility, that was their last game. They came to Nashville with their season on the line, and now, there's still a lot at stake. There's a lot to be said about winning an SEC championship, right? But it's not as win or go home type deal with them as it was last year. They still have a larger tournament to play for, and I think that kind of helps with them playing loose and being a little more comfortable, because yesterday's shoot-around was light. It was a light shoot-around. They were loose. They were joking around, and you could tell there wasn't I guess maybe not a doomsday type feel to the shoot-around, and a lot of shoot-arounds can be before big games. They're playing with house money right now, and that definitely reflects in the team's attitude.
And what is that balance, in your opinion, when it comes to being loose, having fun, enjoying the moment of playing in an SEC tournament, but also trying your best to win all these games? Because there's a degree of looseness that you can go up there and get beat by an Arkansas team that's locked in, knowing they have to run the table this weekend to win the SEC tournament themselves to end up playing in the NCAA tournament. So where do you find that balance between loose and also staying locked in?
Yeah, you can be loose, but you can't be aloof. You know what I'm saying? You can't underestimate this Arkansas team. Yeah, they've underachieved mightily this year, and it's almost inexcusable that a team that talented has, 15 losses on the season. But you can't overlook them because they have that feeling. I mean, you saw what they did against Alabama and pushing them to overtime. You saw the switch they turned in the Vanderbilt game last night, where they went from being down 15 to being up 7 in the last minute of the game, because they finally turned up the defensive pressure and they hit a switch because they are just that good that they are able to reach that. For South Carolina, I think playing with house money and playing loose is good, but you can't, I guess, stray from the things that got you here, right? That preparation, that is sticking to your defensive principles, that's being able to chest the ball, not getting screened and staying screened, on defense. And a lot of the things that got you here, you can still apply, but maybe do so with less pressure than what you had early on in the conference slate when you really were in a process of trying to prove that you belong with the contenders of the league.
You mentioned that game last night between Arkansas and Vanderbilt, and I think a lot of us thought, wow, look at Vanderbilt, 14-point lead at halftime. Maybe they're going to be the special team in the tournament this year. But, again, Arkansas really turning up the heat on defense in that second half, and an explosive second half for Tremont Mark as well, scoring 18 points, helping Arkansas get to that victory in overtime. And you're somebody that's played basketball at the high school level. How much more wear and tear is that extra 5 minutes that they had to play last night with a short turnaround today, playing again at 3:30?
It adds up, man. It adds up, especially when you're a team like Arkansas that has completely cut their rotation. They're playing 9-10 guys at major minutes at the beginning of the year, and someone like Jalen Graham, who started some games, who's been a key contributor on the team early in the season, was a DNP last night. So Arkansas, that's cut the rotation. Musselman talked last night about how they've cut the rotation a little bit and how the biggest thing for them going into today is having to rest their bodies. They're not going to do a normal shoot-around. He likened it to what NBA teams do when they play back-to-backs. And Musselman has an NBA background. He's coached as a head coach in the NBA before coming to Arkansas. So he's treating this like it's a back-to-back, and they're going to be off their feet as much as possible because that extra 5 minutes does add up. And you can tell maybe in some of the long jump shots for both teams, last night weren't falling as much as they were earlier in the game. I think both teams were shooting at least 50% from three until about the 10-minute mark to go in the game. So that's what, 30 minutes of basketball? Yes, teams shooting for a combined 50% from three. That's remarkable. And the jumpers weren't as automatic, later on in the game, because when your legs go, your jumper goes a little bit. And you could see that fatigue wearing in, especially in the later part of the game when Vanderbilt had a couple of shots to keep it a little more interesting in the final minutes of overtime. They were falling a little short. So there's a fatigue factor that I think going to overtime is going to benefit South Carolina, because Arkansas they're going to play desperate. They need this game. They need it badly, because they're in the position that South Carolina was last year, where there's nothing after this. This is their season. They got nothing left to lose, and while that will give you some emotional energy, there is a real physical fatigue factor that goes into playing an extra 5 minutes of really tightly contested ball.
And it sounds like Eric Musselman has a pretty thorough process for these quick turnarounds in conference play, and I don't think it can be understated what kind of tournament coach he is. Perhaps one of the best in the entire country. Look at the team a season ago that was sub 500 in conference play, and he got them all the way to a Sweet 16. 2 Elite Eights before that, tons of success when he was at Nevada coaching there beforehand. Like, this is a guy in these tournament settings that's very dangerous no matter what kind of team he brings to the table.
Exactly, and that's a really good point to bring out. And it hit me last night like a really weird feeling of deja vu watching him coach at Bridgestone Arena, at the same arena that when he was the coach in Nevada, erased a 22-point deficit against Cincinnati in the second round of the NCAA tournament back in 2018, which was one of the most remarkable comebacks I've ever seen. It really kind of brought to me that, man, this guy is not only great in tournament settings, he's great at the in-game adjustment. And last night, the in-game adjustment was extending your pressure past half court against Vanderbilt. Your team needed a spark, you needed energy. You also needed to speed Vanderbilt up so they couldn't just pound the air out of the ball for 25 seconds to the shot clock and get a little closer to closing the game out. And they did. He's a great in-game adjuster, and this guy is so good with cramming a scout in these tournament settings, whether there's a 1 or 2 day turnaround, as good as anybody else in the sport. And you nailed it. His track record speaks for itself with the multiple Elite Eights and the Sweet 16 appearances he's been here. And at Nevada, not only did you have that comeback that I alluded to at Bridgestone Arena, that team went to the Sweet 16. That was obviously it was a Sweet 16 team, and built them for success even for the years after he left. But he's one of the best coaches in this sport, and for that reason alone, you can't count him out, even though they've been just wildly disappointing.
You certainly can't count them out when they see a team for a second time. Looking back at their schedule this year, I alluded to it earlier, every single conference win that they have is a team that they either swept or beat the second time that they played them, including Vanderbilt last night, a team they had lost to just a couple of weeks ago at home, 85-82. So there's something about playing a team a second time. You mentioned those second half adjustments. Maybe it's just getting a full 40-minute look at a team the first time around and being able to better prepare for them the second time. We rewind back to South Carolina versus Arkansas at the end of January. South Carolina wins that game pretty handily by 13 points out there at Bud Walton Arena. But here's that second opportunity for Arkansas to get another shot at them.
Yeah, and it's funny, in the presser last night, Musselman did allude to, he goes, we obviously can't do what we did back in January, because if we played them the same way we played them at Bud Walton, we're going to get the exact same results. And he kind of chuckled at that, and he's right. They're going to have to be able to find a way to speed up South Carolina, and that's why I have a good feeling that we're going to see them extend a little half-court pressure. We're going to see them maybe trap a little bit. They did that in Vanderbilt last night, and it worked. Granted, I'd say Talon Cooper is a much more trustworthy point guard in terms of getting the ball out of his hands and dictating the tempo than maybe Ezra Magnon is. But they were able to keep the ball out of Tyron Lawrence's hands. That was their main objective going into the game last night, was to keep it out of Lawrence's hands, and they successfully did that. And they made Ezra Magnon have to score almost 30 points and drop 6 assists just to get him to overtime. So that's he's really good at those adjustments. I think we're going to see more defensive pressure from Arkansas today. I think we're going to see them try to get in transition a hell of a lot better than they did when they met at Bud Walton Arena back in January. And that's going to be the biggest thing of this game. If Arkansas is able to get this in a fast break setting, and they're able to give themselves a little bit of cushion, we might see it get interesting. I don't think that happens, but I think there is a small likelihood that they make it very interesting.
Well, excited to see what happens coming up today at 3:30. Pregame coverage starting here on the game at 3 o'clock. Before we let you go, as always, we've got to thank our friends over at Cool Care Heating, Air, Plumbing, and Refrigeration for letting you be out there and covering this tournament for us.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a big shout-out to them, and excited to cover this tournament every single year. And it's one of the best league tournaments in the country, and it always delivers. So very excited to be here from our friends at Cool Care Heating, Air, Plumbing, and Refrigeration for allowing me to come here and hang out, and for Friends with Actions Vlog, go and tweet about it.
Well, we will check back in with you tomorrow morning and tomorrow afternoon as well, and fingers crossed that we're talking about a South Carolina-Auburn matchup in the quarterfinals.
Yeah, like I said earlier, I don't want to jinx it, but I think there's a strong likelihood that we will be talking at this time tomorrow about a matchup with Auburn.
All right, well, have fun. First game gets rolling in about 15 minutes. Know you're going to be locked into that one as well.
Oh, absolutely. Should be a fun one.
All right, that's Elijah Campbell out at Bridgestone Arena covering the SEC men's tournament for us here at the game again, sponsored by our friends at Cool Care Heating, Air, Plumbing, and Refrigeration as well. We'll come back at the Firehouse Subs text of the hour, get some of your thoughts on the Love Chevrolet phone lines as well in reference to my question from earlier. What are your expectations for this team in the postseason? But that next is the halftime show. Tyler Head along with you on your Thursday on the game. Welcome back in. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head, Captain Dave, along with you on this Thursday afternoon. Terry Ford will be back in next week. He's missed so many things this week. He's going to have to do a lot of catching up when he does come back in on Monday. Real quick, I want to remind you, as always, you can listen to 107.5 The Game here in Columbia, 100.5 The Game in Florence, 100.3 The Game in Myrtle Beach. Watch us on the 107.5, or listen to us on the 107.5 The Game app, and stream us on The Game TV, sponsored by Shepherd's Glass. Time for our Firehouse Subs text of the hour, 803-404-6100. In terms of expectations for the team this postseason, nameless texter weighs in and says, how about an SEC tournament championship and a Sweet 16 run? I don't think any people would argue with saying that's a pretty darn good postseason. Certainly possible. Again, South Carolina showed the ability to play with and beat just about everybody that they've been put in front of. So I'm not marking that out of the realm of possibility. Of course, you got to get through Arkansas today and Auburn tomorrow to get into the semifinals of the SEC tournament. But I feel like that's an expectation without maybe being too extreme at this point in time. More reaction to this. Ray weighing in on the Love Chevrolet phone lines. Ray, appreciate your call. What is on your mind? What are your expectations for Lamont Paris's crew this postseason?
Sure, Tyler. Hey, thanks for taking my call, man. Yeah, I tell you, congratulations on everything that he has earned, because he has definitely earned it. That was good news to hear what you reported a little bit earlier. But to me, if we can win the first game of the NCAA tournament, of course, I'm like everybody, I want to win every game we compete in. But if we can at least get one win in the NCAA tournament, to me that goes a long ways. And I tell you what, Tyler, and Captain Dave, he could attest to this. When we had that run in 2017, that was the first time we had a NCAA tournament win since 1973. So you're going back to the Nixon administration when we had the great Brian Winters and, Frank McGuire and all that. So to me, if we win a tournament game this year, that's a plus. And if somehow we don't, no, it's definitely not a negative from where we were last year and where we have been the last few years. So, but if we can somehow win a tournament game, now, of course, when we win a tournament game, I'm going to want another win, like any other fan.
Sure.
But to me, if we can get that tournament win, to me, getting a tournament win would mean more than saying having a deep run in the SEC basketball tournament, because I think that NCAA tournament is like the gold, if you ask me. So I'm all sign me up for getting at least one win in the big dance.
I think that's a reasonable expectation. Real quick, I want to ask, before the season started, when they were projected to be, bottom barrel of the SEC, what was your expectation of the team at that point in time?
I will be honest, I was thinking that was probably close. I thought we would probably be somewhere between 10 and 14. And why I say that is this league is just so good. I mean, it's just so talented. I mean, you look at Auburn, you look at all these teams, Tennessee, and even Arkansas. I hope I didn't jinx us there, but I mean, it's just loaded with teams and skilled players. And so, I knew it would be tough. I mean, it's tough to sustain these games. So what they did, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that I thought they were probably going to be the worst team in the league, but I sure wouldn't have said it would have been in the top half. So it's been sweet.
Took a lot of people by surprise. Appreciate it as always, Ray. And I think Ray shares the same sentiment that a lot of people do. Obviously, again, when you're kind of living in the moment of being where South Carolina is, you want to look ahead to those aspirations of, oh, hey, here's our path. Maybe we could make a Sweet 16 run, Final Four run, whatever it may be. But I think when it's all said and done, and yes, theoretically, whenever the loss comes, that's not going to be fun. And you would wonder what could have been if a couple things went differently in that game whenever it does, does happen. But I think looking back, down the road. And again, we hope this is just the beginning of success for South Carolina under Lamont Paris. You get into the summertime or something like that. If you look back and say, man, they won 25 games in the regular season. They won, let's just say, 2 games at the SEC tournament and then won 1 game in the NCAA tournament. It's like, man, especially with where they were projected to start, that was a darn good season, and I enjoyed it as much as I could. And again, you hope that's something that you build off of going into next year and the year after, and all that kind of stuff. But I think at least one win is probably on a lot of people's wish list for the tournament coming up, because again, it's a program that, as Ray mentioned, prior to that Final Four run, had not had a win in nearly 50 years. So, kind of looking at it through that lens, it's a program that has not had a lot of sustained success. So any kind of positive with the NCAA tournament, I think really goes a long way. And I hope, at least at bare minimum, they get the one win, and whatever happens past that happens. But, maybe it's Sweet 16, maybe even Elite 8 if we want to get crazy with it. Who knows? But, college basketball is obviously a sport where anything can happen and any team can seemingly win at any time. So you can never put too tight of a bolt on that ceiling, because again, I think this team is certainly capable of doing a lot of special things. We'll dive into more of the basketball conversation as the show goes along. Coming up next, though, in the 1 o'clock hour, it is football, and more football here on the halftime show. Tyler Head along with you, flying solo up until 3. Terry Ford will be back next week here on The Game. Hour number 2, welcome back in. It's the halftime show. Tyler Head, Captain Dave, along with you. Plenty more basketball to get to, which we will certainly do in the 2 o'clock hour, getting you set for the Gamecocks and the Razorbacks out there at Bridgestone Arena in the second round of the NCAA tournament. But it's 1 o'clock. That means it is time for football, and more football. And as we sit here today, March the 14th, it means we're 170 days away from week number 1 of college football, that being August the 31st, which when I throw that number out at you, and it always makes me think of Colin, my former co-host on the In the Bonus from Gamecock Central. Anytime I throw that number out there, because he always cringed every time I did, because as of right now, it seems like it's really far away as we sit here in the middle of March. But hopefully, as the summer gets closer and closer, it'll go by a little bit quicker, and you blink and boom, college football is here. The things that really keep us going, it's really funny, and the NFL does a better job of this than college football does in terms of spacing out their calendar, giving you just enough of a little tease, every couple of months to get you set for a football season before it finally gets here. So with the NFL, you obviously have the Super Bowl that takes place in now early February. Then at the end of February, early March, like we just had, you had the Combine. Then you have the free agency market, which is going on as of right now. We've got the NFL draft, which is coming up here in a little over a month's time. And then you get into camps at the end of summer and all that kind of stuff, all kind of packaged in throughout the entire year to at least never take you too far away from the game of football. And then when it finally gets here, boom, you're off and running until February again. College football kind of does this, but maybe not to the same degree. But there are these little things that happen throughout the year, and we do have spring practice starting up next week for the Gamecocks, as well as several other teams. In fact, Missouri's already started spring practice. They are playing their spring game coming up Saturday. So if you want to watch some college football, I believe it's at 2 o'clock on the ESPN Plus or SEC Network Plus. So they're already well ahead of the curve on that one. But you have these things throughout the year that they give you little teases and keep you locked in until football season ultimately gets here. One that came out the other day that I'm always intrigued by is early lines for big games this upcoming season. This was released by FanDuel, a handful of games, not all of them, and ones that are kind of spread out throughout the season. But it's very interesting to look at some of these games and see where the experts, and these are people that literally dedicate nothing but all of their time to figuring out point spreads on these respective sports, in this case being college football. So the intel and the reasoning for making these lines are grounded in stats, grounded in eye test, all that kind of stuff. And there's a reason they don't just spit these numbers out randomly. There's a reason they come up with the numbers that they do. Now, for this upcoming football season, you actually have the flexibility, if you want to go drive across the state lines to North Carolina now and go do some sports gambling if you do want to do that. And we'll see if South Carolina ever gets into that same realm. Sometime in the near future. Regardless, again, FanDuel releasing some lines for some early games, or from some games coming up in 2024, including a Week 1 matchup that pits LSU versus Southern Cal at Allegiant Stadium in Las Vegas. LSU, 6.5-point favorite in that game. I don't think that really comes as a lot of a surprise, but when you really kind of break it down and look at these two teams, very, very similar in a lot of ways going into this offseason. Both those teams are replacing superstar quarterbacks. Caleb Williams won the freaking Heisman Trophy 2 years ago and is projected to be the #1 pick overall in the draft. Jaden Daniels just won the Heisman Trophy this past year and is also projected to be a very high pick in the upcoming NFL draft. So regardless of who comes in after those guys, it's going to be some kind of drop-off in performance, more likely than not. I'm assuming Garrett Nussmeier is the starter at LSU, and that's a guy that 2 seasons ago in 2022 showed some flashes of potential when he had to come in for an injured Jaden Daniels in the SEC championship game against Georgia, that mauling Georgia defense, and actually put up some respectable numbers, really good numbers at that. So there's optimism that maybe when you turn the keys over to him, it won't be that much of a drop-off. Miller Moss, who, and USC has several quarterback options, Southern Cal, has several quarterback options. But Miller Moss played in that Holiday Bowl, set the record for touchdown passes in it, and really showed out in that regard. So there's ever opportunity for him to to potentially be the start of this upcoming season. But again, when you're replacing a former Heisman Trophy winner and #1 overall pick, it's going to take a step back in some regard. Both these teams also had a lot of defensive issues this past year. LSU, for as great as their offense was, and for as many yards that Jaden Daniels put up on a week-in, week-out basis, that defense couldn't stop a nosebleed. They let everybody score on them. That game against Ole Miss where both teams scored like 50 points and had 700 yards of offense. If they cut that number in a third, they win that game by like 3 touchdowns. And that was the ultimate undoing of the team as a whole because, again, Jaden Daniels and those superstars on offense lights out. But the defense, with good pieces on it like Harold Perkins, just couldn't figure out how to stop anybody. It was the wildest thing. And on the other side of things, Southern Cal has been allergic to defense ever since Lincoln Riley got there. And that's a Lincoln Riley thing. Going back to his time at Oklahoma, he didn't care about defense there. He had Heisman Trophy winners at quarterback. We'll score 60. As long as we don't give up more than that, we're good. And that's how they won a lot of games. But I think last year, especially after coming off of a season where they were so close to the college football playoff, they had a chance to make it in the Final Four and got their teeth kicked in the championship game by a very physical Utah defense. And then this past year, just a laughably bad defense that couldn't stop anybody either. From everything we've heard this past offseason with Lincoln Riley, it seems like there's been a change of heart when it comes to his philosophy on defense. We'll see if that happens or not. It's one thing to say, it's another thing to do it. But they're at least trying to get somewhat better on that side of the ball. They're at least addressing it as an issue compared to what's been going on in years past. They obviously fired Alex Grinch, as they should have. I mean, he should have never gone to Southern Cal with Lincoln Riley to begin with, but they finally have corrected that mistake. So a lot of unknowns between these two teams, but as of right now, 6.5 point favorite for LSU in that game in Las Vegas in week #1. Georgia heading to Tuscaloosa at the end of September as a 3.5 point favorite against Alabama. Now, the significance of this game is interesting because it's Kalen DeBoer's first conference game. Now, yes, it's at home, but you are also taking on the team that's won 2 out of the last 3 national championships. And it's so interesting to me, the narrative surrounding games like this between when it was announced on the schedule and when Kalen DeBoer was announced as the head coach at Alabama. Because with Nick Saban as the head coach, this was one of those things like, man, Georgia might be looking at a loss early on in the season because to this point, Kirby Smart's only beaten Nick Saban one time, or is only going to have beaten Nick Saban one time, that being in the national championship game a couple years ago. So there was that narrative of like, Nick Saban just knows how to beat Kirby. And this is probably going to be the same case again. But now you take Nick Saban out of the equation and say, okay, well, now Kalen DeBoer is going to get his welcome to the SEC against one of the best teams in recent memory in the SEC. And likely is probably going to lose that one out of the gate. Now, depending on how they played through the first 3 weeks of the regular season, maybe that narrative changes. We don't know. But, I mean, if I had to bet right now, I'd lean towards Georgia as well. It makes a lot of sense to me. And that number could grow more. Again, depending on what happens in those first couple of weeks of the season. Georgia's got Clemson to open up the year. To go out there and smash them, and Alabama struggles through their first couple of weeks of the season, don't be surprised if that number does end up growing a little bit. But I can honestly see why they would put Alabama as a dog, which think about how rare that was in the Nick Saban era. I feel like, and this is just off the top of my head here, but I think that game of the century back in 2011, where it was #1 LSU and #2 Alabama, I want to say LSU was a favorite in that one. If they were favored, it was like a point or something like that, and it ended up being a 9-6 overtime win for LSU. But very, very rarely in the Saban era did they have a opponent come in as a favorite. And where we stand right now, it looks like that's going to be the case of Kalen DeBoer's first game as the head coach there at Alabama. Now, we'll see how much the narrative shifts. The first 3 weeks of the season, they play Western Kentucky. They play South Florida again. and then they go on the road to Wisconsin. That Wisconsin game is probably going to be the barometer of where this team stands prior to playing Georgia. A couple more here. Looking at lines for this upcoming season. This one's interesting. Ohio State listed as an 8.5-point favorite over Michigan. The game, the one at the end of the season. This is where they see the line of that game as of right now. And I'll say this, for Ryan Day's sake, he better hope they beat him, because there's no more excuses. Jim Harbaugh is gone. J.J. McCarthy, Blake Corum, guys like that, all these superstar players that Michigan's had have moved on to the NFL. Like, Michigan's not exactly starting over, and yes, Sharon Moore's taking over as the head coach, so it's not like you're bringing in an entirely new coaching staff. A lot of things are staying status quo, but Jim Harbaugh's regarded as one of the best coaches in all of football. That's the reason why he got the chance to go back to the NFL to pursue a Super Bowl, because he's that good. Sharon Moore doesn't have those chops. Yeah, he won when he was asked to be an interim coach a season ago, but in terms of taking on his first full season as a head coach, if Michigan beats Ohio State in that game, no matter what Ohio State's record is, there's going to be serious conversation around Ryan Day. Like, is this really our guy? Can't even beat the second option at head coach after the first one left? Just saying, especially when you look at the talent that Ohio State's been able to accumulate in the transfer portal, and give them credit. Ryan Day pushed for their collective to step up and fork over some more dough, and they've done it. They got Will Howard coming at quarterback from Kansas State. Quinshon Judkins, one of the best running backs in the SEC in the past couple seasons at running back. Caleb Downs, literally perhaps the best freshman athlete in all of college football this past season. Skipped over going and playing for his home state school in Georgia, where it was a very heavy lean when he went into the portal to go play at Ohio State. And, of course, they've certainly made it worth his while. But all this coming together seems like it's a destined team for Ohio State to really do something, including beating Michigan. And like I said, if they don't, it's going to be an uncomfortable conversation around Ryan Day up there, up there in Columbus. Couple more to look at here. And, again, there's a long list of these, and you can find it on FanDuel. Also, a write-up of this on on3.com as well. This one is kind of funny to me. Colorado is a 7.5-point favorite against North Dakota State. Now you look at that and say, well, of course they're a favorite. North Dakota State's an FCS school. Yeah, but they're also like the best FCS school. North Dakota State went through a run of, I want to say 6 to 7 years, where they beat at least one Power 5 team every season. It got so bad to the point that Power 5 teams stopped scheduling them. They played Arizona a couple years ago, and it was a 3-point game, 31-28 loss. That was the last time they played a Power 5 opponent. So Colorado welcoming them in, that's not a guarantee. That could legitimately be a game that Dion and company lose to North Dakota State, which, again, best FCS program by far in the country, but still doesn't look good when you lose to those kind of teams, especially as what will be a Big 12 team at that point in time with Colorado when the fall rolls around. And one more here. I mentioned Georgia opened up the season against Clemson in Atlanta. Georgia's a 12.5-point favorite over Clemson in that one. So the folks at FanDuel think that Georgia should cruise to an easy victory to open up the season. One team that's not on this list when it comes to early projections, early lines, is Florida. A lot of conversation going to be had about Florida this offseason. One national talking head when it comes to college football thinks we're being a little too hard on the Gators. I'll get into that coming up. It's the halftime show. Tyler Head along with you here on The Game on your Thursday. Welcome back in. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head with you on this Thursday. Again, we'll have plenty more on men's basketball coming up in the 2 o'clock hour, getting you set for their game against Arkansas coming up today at 3:30. Pregame cards starting at 3 o'clock right here on the game. Also want to remind you, with baseball season in full swing, go online to 1075thegame.com. Register to win the Palmetto Citizens Federal Credit Union Grand Slam giveaway. Every game, $25 gets added to the pot. And when a Gamecock hitter blasts a Grand Slam this season, you could be the lucky winner of however much money is in the pot, currently sitting at $450. Talking about the offseason, we like to analyze teams across college football, take a look at what they did the past season, look ahead to next season, and kind of project out to where we think they're going to be. Florida's a team that comes up a lot. And we've rightfully, especially when the schedule came out for 2024, looked at their schedule and said, no way. This team's cooked. There's no way they're going to win any games in the month of November. Billy Napier's not even going to make it to the end of the season as head coach. They are done. Stick a fork in them. Are we being a little bit too critical, though? Greg McElroy of ESPN, the Always College Football podcast, thinks we are.
For Florida, I think it's amazing. Every single thing, like I'm researching Florida, I'm studying Florida, I'm watching tape from Florida last year. And while there were a lot of disappointing aspects of the 23 tape, it's tough. I'm not going to lie. It's a tough watch. But every single thing you read about the Florida Gators is about one of two things. One, how hot is the seat for Billy Napier? And two, how impossible their schedule is this year. If you want to dive into where they're at offensively, hey, here's some key position battles. Here's what I'm paying close attention to. Here we are defensively. Here are the guys that I think are going to need to step up. Like, it's almost hard to read those things. Everyone's basically putting Florida in the ground. They're burying them, and they're saying they have no chance here in 24. Guys, it is still the Florida Gators. Look, I'm not picking them to go to the playoff, okay? I'm not picking them to go to the playoff. I'm not sitting here and saying, yep, hey, keep an eye on Florida. Now, this is a team that's going to be sneaky. Watch when they win 9 games. I'm going to say, I told you so. No, I'm not saying any of those things. What I think Florida is doing right now, they feel an awful lot like West Virginia last year. And you're going to say, well, that's not a good comparison. Well, everyone said West Virginia was done. They're going to finish last in the Big 12. They're going to have their coach. He's going to be out. It's done. Why are we even wasting time talking about Neil Brown in 24? Like, West Virginia's dead. Florida feels very similar. And then guess what? Florida gets going a little bit. Maybe they pull off an upset there in the early part of the season against Miami. Maybe they beat UCF. Maybe they beat some teams in the SEC. Because I look at their schedule, and there are some winnable games. I also look, too, they have Graham Mertz. And Graham Mertz had a rock-solid season last year. I also look at some of the pieces they brought in. Now, they might be young on defense in a few spots, but they have some possible difference makers. So, I'm just saying, I'm not picking Florida to go to the SEC title game. I'm not picking Florida to go to the college football playoff. I'm not even picking Florida to be in the top 25. All I'm saying, though, is that the roster is in much better shape when you dive into it than you might expect based on some of the outside noise.
So he brings up a good point, and I'll admit, I think we all kind of fall into that group that he's talking about that has been highly critical of Florida this offseason when kind of projecting ahead to saying, well, they got a tough schedule, and I don't know if Billy Napier's the guy for the job, and I don't think we're wrong in thinking that. But when you do take a little bit of a deeper dive, there are some interesting things about this team. I want to stick with one thing that he said, though. He said, this is still the Florida Gators. I'm not so sure that means what he was implying that it meant, if that makes sense. Now, for a long time, Florida has been viewed as one of the power programs in college football. Certainly when Coach Spurrier was there in the late 90s, all the way through when Urban Meyer was there in the, in the 2000s, they were always thought as a team that was either in the mix for a national championship or just in that like rung right below. So always viewed as one of the top programs in college football. Since Urban Meyer left, which was the 2010 season, was his last year coaching there, they haven't been the same. They averaged 7 wins a year. since 2011, first year Will Muschamp was there as the head coach, they've averaged 7 wins a year, which is perfectly respectable. And hey, 7 wins gets you to a bowl game, which is something they didn't do a year ago. But it's not the same standard that was set for the 20 or some odd years before that. They're different now. They are a middle-of-the-pack program in the SEC. And you can say, well, they went to 3 SEC championship games in the past decade. That's true. But 15 and 16, I think they really took advantage of a pretty average to below average SEC East at that point in time. They just happened to be that representative to choose to go get mauled in the SEC championship game. Both times by Alabama? Yeah, both times by Alabama in regards to that one. And then in 2021, I'll give them credit. That was a good team. They gave Alabama a run for their money in that SEC championship game, but ultimately came up short. They had the Shoegate thing a couple games, the game before against LSU. They lost the Cotton Bowl, got blown out by, funny enough, Spencer Rattler and the Oklahoma Sooners. That was almost seemed like a one-year flash in the pan. By the end of next season, Dan Mullen was gone, and then they're moving on to Billy Napier. And I just haven't seen enough out of Billy Napier as a head coach so far to give me reason to think that Florida's just going to suddenly turn it back on and become a contender in the divisionless SEC now. So it's not just winning your conference. It's not just getting over that hump of Georgia and Tennessee over these past couple years as well. You got to legitimately be one of the best 2 teams in the conference to make the championship game. You got to legitimately be probably one of the best 4 teams or 5 teams in the conference to make the college football playoff. And I just don't think I see enough out of this team to do that. As I said, there are some good things. They returned 68% of their production for this upcoming year, which is 32nd best in the country. And that can certainly translate well. Florida State had the best last year, and they should have been in the college football playoff. But Texas A&M had the 7th best at 80% a year ago, and they fell off the wagon and fired their head coach. So, again, it's not a perfect indicator on how good or bad a team is going to be for the upcoming season. They did fine in the transfer portal. They did fine recruiting, got a top 15 class, got a 5-star here, there, or 2. But they lost big productive guys. They lost Ricky Pearsall, their best wide receiver. They lost Trevor Etienne to the rival Georgia. They lost Princely Yu at defensive end. I don't see enough from this team to think that they're going to be able to claw their way out of this hole that is, again, that bear of a schedule that you can't ignore. I know it's an easy talking point, but how can you not? It's there. They legitimately have the toughest stretch in the season of any school in the entire country, and I, as of right now, don't see them getting past that. Now, if they come out of the gate firing on all cylinders in August and September, then my attitude can change. But where I sit right now in this offseason, seeing the moves they've made, pieces they've brought in, guys they've lost, all that kind of stuff, coaching staff changes they've made, I just don't see anything to instill a lot of confidence. And yes, this is a team that came in to Williams-Brice Stadium and beat South Carolina. That being said, overall in Billy Napier's tenure, even before he got there, going back to the Mullen days, this is a terrible program on the road. They play much different at home as opposed to on the road. And with the exception of the South Carolina game last year, that still holds true. And they didn't win another game after that and missed making a bowl game. So again, where I sit right now, I don't buy into this team suddenly being able to flip a switch and being turned into something respectable, which again, even McElroy said, hey, I'm not putting him in the playoff, not putting him in the SEC championship game, but I think he's at least implying this team's good enough to get to a bowl game. I don't know. I haven't seen it yet. Again, my opinion can change, but where I sit right now, I can't quite say that I buy into that belief as of yet. And again, it's a team we'll talk about plenty as the offseason rolls along. Coming up next, we usually do this in the morning time, but schedules have been shifted around a little bit this week. Jen Jensen going to join me on the other side, talk a little bit of racing as we do our weekly check-in on the world of NASCAR. That's coming up next. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head along with you, Captain Dave, producing on the other side of the glass here on The Game.
This will be his 4th consecutive season with a victory in the NASCAR Cup Series. Christopher Bell off the final corner, and he wins in Phoenix.
Excellent job, Adam. White Knight Willie, everyone on this 20 car, thank you guys. Excellent, excellent car.
Welcome back in. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head flying solo today, going up until 3. Terry Ford will be back in with me coming up at the beginning of next week. This is a segment we typically do in the morning time. Schedules have been a little bit crazy this week and all over the place. So doing it today, Jen Jensen joining me on the Love Chevrolet phone lines now. Talk a little bit of racing. That, of course, the sound you heard there was the call on Fox on Sunday where Christopher Bell picked up a win at the Phoenix Raceway. First win of the season, first non-Chevrolet win of the year in the NASCAR Cup Series. And Jen, I was talking about this with my buddy last night. We were doing our racing podcast that we call Up to Speed. And I mentioned, Christopher Bell has made the last 2 Final Fours. Christopher Bell just won at the track where the championship's going to be decided once again this upcoming season. But similar to what he said on the Netflix documentary that came out a couple months ago, we're still overlooking the guy. I imagine not a lot of people are probably going to put him in the Final Four as we get down closer and closer to the end of the season. This is a guy that continues to fly under the radar, but continues to win and win and win.
Oh, man. He is really I think you're right. He's being overlooked for sure. And I think with Joe Gibbs, look at how Joe Gibbs is doing overall. They had 3 guys in the top 10 this past week. So right now, the team in general is clicking kind of on all cylinders. And if you look at some of the racing stats, he's a sneaky little guy, and I think he'll go into the playoffs fairly deep. I don't rule him out as in the Final Four.
Well, through the first 3 weeks of the season, as I mentioned, Chevrolet had dominated. They won Daytona with William Byron, won at Atlanta with Daniel Suarez, and won at Las Vegas with Kyle Larson a week ago. And we've talked so much this offseason about not really knowing when the Toyotas and the Fords were going to show up with these new respective body styles. And I don't know what it is about a flat track like Phoenix, but it certainly plays well into the new Toyota Camry, because with the exception of 14 laps led by Todd Gilliland on Sunday, every other lap was led by a Toyota driver.
It was incredible. And, you heard going in that really Phoenix had been more of a Chevy-dominated track. If you could look back at the stats, and all of a sudden, here come the Toyotas. They came off the trucks, and they dominated the entire weekend. It was really something.
Yeah, and that's kind of one of those things that as the season goes along, we always see it anytime there's new body style or anything like that. These teams learn things, figure things out, and will continue to get better at some of these other tracks. But it seems like Toyota is leaps and bounds ahead of everyone at these shorter tracks as of right now. And when you look at what's coming up over the course of the next couple weeks, Bristol this weekend, you got Richmond, you got Martinsville, all these short tracks right in a row. We could be talking about dominance with Toyota roughly over the course of the next month.
I think it's very possible, and I'm really excited as we start talking about like the Bristol race. I'm really excited that we're getting back to the regular short track, and I know that we'll merge into that here in just a second.
Oh yes, you're on the long list of people that we're very happy to see the Bristol Dirt Race go away, and we'll dive into specifics of that in just a moment. This past weekend at Phoenix, though, was a big conversation point from the standpoint of another rules package being tried at the shorter tracks where NASCAR, is playing around with the downforce. They added a little bit more to the spoiler, kept some of the stuff from the underbody the same from a season ago, just trying to make things different, made the tire a little bit softer. And I'll say this, because Phoenix has never really been known to put on amazing races on a year-in, year-out basis. I do think it was a little bit better than maybe what we saw a season ago, but not something that gives me, I'd say, a ton of optimism that places like Martinsville and Phoenix are suddenly going to look drastically different.
No, I don't. I think they're still working on tweaking it, and I think NASCAR officials are admitting that they're indeed needing to keep working on things, because it might have been a little bit better racing, and there were more passes, more green flag passes in this race than there had been in previous races. So they're optimistic in that respect that the racing is getting better, but there's still a ways to go for sure.
There absolutely is, and a lot of conversation this week. And look, this is a topic that comes up quite a bit, but I can't remember any time, at least not recently, that so many people within the industry are talking about it, is the debate on horsepower with these cars. They've been at 670 since the beginning of the next gen era as their top horsepower output at all these tracks, with the exception of super speedways. But you hear guys like Kevin Harvick saying, "Hey, if you want better short track racing, you need to put a lot of power into these cars, to where these guys are on that edge of control and really having to manage their tires, manage their equipment, compared to really just not quite being flat-footed at these places, but not having a lot of off-throttle time as well." But NASCAR seems to be pretty resistant on wanting to make those changes.
Yeah, I don't kind of understand, and I know that some of the excuses have been that they're just they're keeping the horsepower lower because they want to see about other manufacturers coming in, maybe Honda coming in, or maybe Dodge coming back, or something like that. But as far as there hasn't, once Toyota came in, I think it was 2008, 2009, somewhere in there.
07.
There's been no other so there's been no other manufacturer that's come in. So who are you courting at this point? And why don't you listen to your drivers? And I know that Hamlin and Kyle Larson have all been kind of screaming like, you don't have to go to this, but at least could we test and see how things go?
Sure.
And Kyle Larson, you may have heard the Dirty Mo podcast where he actually said, I was talking to an engine guy at Hendrick, and he said, we could have a 1,000 horsepower engine at Bristol this weekend if we wanted it. It's not costing more like some people keep saying that it might be.
Yeah, and that's the frustrating part. And look, I could be here all day talking about the fact that you have people in positions of power that have never driven race cars in their life deciding what, makes good racing, while the people that actually drive the cars are telling them that they're wrong. But again, that's a debate for a different day. But it is a frustrating thing, especially with how, not willing to budge NASCAR's been, because they've changed everything else. Again, spoilers, underbody stuff, tires, literally everything but changing the horsepower input of these cars. And you feel like that's kind of a last resort, but we can't be far away from it, especially if the racing over the next couple weeks doesn't look any better than it has been.
Right. And, we were fortunate as far as like ratings for the race. Okay. Phoenix, it was another increase as far as the ratings were concerned. They were up another like 19% in viewership and things like that. Well, if you present too many more Phoenix races, which it was okay racing, but it wasn't great.
Sure.
I'm afraid you're going to start to see the fall off.
Yeah, and hopefully that doesn't start this weekend. They are back at Bristol, traditional Bristol. We've been doing this dirt thing for a couple of years, and look, I'm an open-minded person. I understood what they were trying to do, and I gave it a chance. It just I never watched it and said, yeah, this to me is better than the Bristol short track race in the spring from years past. So I'm glad they're going back to it. Again, hopefully we get a good race. Hopefully it sounds like the weather's going to stay away, which has been a problem for the Bristol spring race for a lot of years. But I'm just glad to be finally back on the short track proper this time around.
I am too. And if you talk to different drivers, they'll tell you that those cars are just not built for dirt. They do okay on it, but with each iteration of the car, it's not supporting dirt track racing. The dirt track racing is great with the cars that are meant to be on dirt. And while, yes, they get a chance to experience all the disciplines and things like that, at the end of the day, I just don't. I'm glad they did it. It was great to talk about. Maybe they brought in some dirt fans, and got more NASCAR fans out of that. But, it's good to be back on the concrete.
Well, I'm looking forward to this upcoming weekend, and we'll have you back on in the middle of next week to recap what happened at Bristol, and we'll be looking ahead to our first road course of the season, heading out to Circuit of the Americas next weekend.
I am so excited about that. Yep, looking forward to it.
All right, again, that's Jen Jensen from the early game, joining me as she always does each and every week, talk a little bit of racing. Speaking of the early game, I want to remind you about the 107.5 Game annual golf tournament coming up April the 5th out at Charwood Golf Club. It's going to have a 10 a.m. shotgun start. If you want to take part in it, it is $400 for a group of 4 to participate. All of your people in the group have a chance to win a pair of tickets to each remaining Gamecock baseball home game for the remainder of the season. Call Charwood Golf Club at 803-755-2000. Again, 803-755-2000 if you want to take part in the 107.5 Game annual Spring Golf Classic. We'll come back, wrap up the hour, get to your Firehouse Subs text of the hour as well here on the halftime show. Tyler Head on the Game. Welcome back into the halftime show. Tyler Head along with you here on The Game. Wrapping up hour number 2. Time to head out to the Firehouse Subs text line, 803-404-6100. Get our text of the hour. I have a nameless texter here that is asking about what happened earlier on this morning that garnered a lot of attention into something that was said in reference to Camila Cardoso when talking about women's basketball. For those that are not familiar, and I'll just kind of get you up to speed on this because you may have seen a lot of buzz on social media or heard about it from somebody and maybe kind of wondering what that situation is all about. Let me give you a little peek behind the curtain real quick. We are a CBS sports affiliate station. Where, from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday, we were on our own local programming, home of the Gamecocks, and we do all that kind of stuff, with this show, with post-game show, early game, Gamecock Central Hour, all that kind of stuff. Outside of that, we run CBS Sports Programming because that is our parent radio affiliate, CBS Sports. And as a part of being an affiliate with CBS Sports, we run what are called CBS Sports Minutes, which is part of our contract with them. We have to do these once an hour, and it always comes in the little break around the 45-minute mark of every single hour. And these things, you've heard them if you listen to the station long enough. It's, the Boomer Esiasons, the Amy Lawrences and stuff, and they'll pop in really quick and give a 30-second spiel on something going on in sports that's relevant in that moment, and then it goes into some of their CBS network advertisers, for the rest of the little break there. And the thing about being an affiliate, we are sent these things. They're automatically loaded into our system. We do not get to listen to them beforehand. We do not get to screen them beforehand, so we don't know what's going to be said. And there's a lot of times where I'll tease what we're going to talk about in the last segment, and then they'll hit it in the sports minute, and I'm like, well, crap. They've already given away what I was going to talk about. But something this morning, it happened around 6:45, a sports minute played from one of the national pundits up there in New York, wherever they are, talking about women's college basketball. Again, very relevant topic going on right now. Had a great weekend of conference championship games, getting set for the NCAA tournament coming up here in a little over, or right at a week's time, I guess. And in talking about women's basketball, he was referring to star players around the country. Mentioned Angel Reese, Caitlin Clark, and also talked about Camila Cardoso, but instead of referring to her by name, referred to her, and this is per the JR Sports Brief of CBS Sports that played earlier this morning, referred to her as the giant Brazilian woman from South Carolina that knocks people over. And rightfully so, a lot of people are upset about that. Dawn Staley was upset about that, as she should have been. Again, it made a lot of rounds on social media. We issued our apology earlier as we felt the need to do so, even though that is not one of our people. They don't work for us. We don't pay them. That is a national person on CBS that, and how that got past their quality control people up there, I don't know. But it ended up airing on our airwaves, and we do accept responsibility from that standpoint that it did come across on our station. But what a horrible reflection, I feel like, of where people view women's basketball, unfortunately. And we here, obviously being the home of the Gamecocks, get to talk about the best program in the entire country on a day-in, day-out basis, which is fantastic. But looking at things from a national standpoint, you can see the game of women's basketball and women's sports in general are garnering a lot more attention and getting a lot of positive momentum. Look at the ratings. People are obviously taking a big interest in it. I'll be very excited to see what the Final Four ratings look like when they come out at the end of this college basketball season. But unfortunately, that drive-by media type of crowd, and yes, I'm pointing fingers at this specific person of CBS Sports, just casually see something like the altercation that happened at the end of the South Carolina LSU game and create that assumption that this is just what women's basketball is. It's just a bunch of women that are emotional and they like to fight and pull each other's hair and all that kind of stuff. And that's how you get these kind of narratives being put out there by somebody up there in New York that has this gigantic platform that unfortunately reaches a lot of people around the country. And again, it's unfortunate that this person was given the airtime to put something like this out there that, resonates negatively, especially in a community like this that loves its women's basketball team so much and loves Camila Cardoso, who is legitimately one of the best players in women's college basketball. She's going to be remembered as one of the best players South Carolina has ever seen before she even goes off to her WNBA career here in a couple of months. And she still has several more games in the NCAA tournament to continue writing her history here as a member of the South Carolina Gamecocks. And to not even dignify her by using her name is one thing, but to refer to her as a giant Brazilian woman who likes to knock people over, that's unacceptable. That's a person. Not only a person, that's a damn good athlete with a damn good story as well. And somebody that, again, is going to be loved and remembered for a long time here at South Carolina. So, again, we take the responsibility here at 107.5 The Game from the standpoint that we did play that over our air, because that is part of our obligation with CBS Sports. We weren't screened to that. We didn't know what was going to be said. And unfortunately, it got out over our airwaves. And again, we are working to ensure that something like that doesn't happen again. It appears that CBS has reached out to Dawn Staley and apologized to her in reference of the person that said this. I'm not super familiar with him from the standpoint of following him or listening to the things that he has to say on a regular basis. And I really hope this isn't a consistent narrative that he's putting out there when it comes to not only women's basketball, but women's sports in general, because again, that's a terrible way to look at this. It's not just a bunch of girls going out there having cat fights. It's legitimate basketball. It's a damn good product, and I really hope he tunes in and watches the NCAA women's tournament to get a full grasp and understanding of just how good this sports can be. But if you weren't caught up on that, there's your couple of minute spiel on what exactly happened this morning. Again, we accept our responsibility, and we're going to work to make sure that that does not happen again. Hour number 3 of the halftime show coming up. Tyler Head with you until 3 here on The Game. 2 o'clock, welcome back in. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head along with you, flying solo for today and tomorrow, getting you set for men's basketball as they get set to play in their first game of the SEC men's tournament. Coming up right at an hour from now will be pregame coverage. And then tip time coming around 3:30. They always kind of list it as a hard time, but if you've watched the tournament for any length of time, it's usually never at the time as advertised. Do have to wait until the first game, which is LSU and Mississippi State, to conclude in its entirety. Right now, that game currently at halftime, LSU with a 29-22 lead over Mississippi State, which is not good news for the Bulldogs, who desperately need this win to keep their hopes alive of making the NCAA tournament. And with that, we will get into what is trending at 2 with everything going on in the world of sports. And we'll keep on the topic of what's happening up there in Nashville at the SEC tournament. This just being reported right about 30 minutes ago by Jeff Borzello of ESPN. Jerry Stackhouse, head coach of the Vanderbilt Commodores, who were in action last night taking on the Arkansas Razorbacks, is set to be relieved of his coaching duties as the head coach of the Vanderbilt Commodores up there in Nashville. He had been at the helm of that program since 2019. Obviously, this year was a very rough year for them in conference, going 4-14, coming in as the number 13 seed in the SEC tournament, and again getting bounced last night. I mean, they made it tough. They tied the game up at the end of regulation and then lost in overtime to Arkansas, which is why South Carolina is playing Arkansas today. And I'll go back to at the conversation with Elijah yesterday, and we were kind of previewing this game. And again, Elijah, a guy from Nashville, very close to the situation up there when it comes to Vanderbilt. He even said that despite what happened at the SEC tournament this year, he felt like Jerry Stackhouse would get at least one more year up there with the Commodores, but that does not appear to be the case as he is being let go. In his time there, had a total overall record of 70-92 and only a 28-60 record in SEC play. Did make the NIT the prior 2 seasons in 2023 and 2022, reached the quarterfinals both of those times, and was even a SEC Coach of the Year last year, but again, just not quite enough being done in the eyes of the folks up there in Nashville to deem him staying around for another year. And it's one of those things. Jerry Stackhouse, I believe, is a good basketball coach, and obviously spent a long time playing in the NBA. So he brings a perspective to to college basketball that not a lot of college coaches have. And I think that resonates well with a lot of players, especially the ones that, as they all do, have aspirations of potentially making the NBA one day. Unfortunately for him, it looks like he's going to have to seek that opportunity elsewhere, as he will no longer be the head coach of the Vanderbilt Commodores. And again, Jeff Borzello reporting on that just about 30 minutes ago. On the flip side of things, and this news came out earlier on this morning, Coach Paris getting an extension before the tournament even starts for the Gamecocks of 6 years, going to the end of the 2029-2030 season, and having an average salary of about $4 million, a little bit more. We don't know the specific numbers just yet, as opposed to the 2.3 that he had made in his first 2 seasons here at South Carolina. And I think that's welcomed by everybody. Makes a lot of sense. This is a guy that, year number 1 was rough. And I think we all knew that coming into the situation that he was inheriting, it was going to take some time to build. And I don't think anybody expected them to build this quickly. Again, we bring it up a lot, but the, projections of them before the season to be at the bottom of the SEC, be in a position kind of like Vanderbilt was this year, to where you win a handful of conference games, you go into the conference tournament as a low seed, to get bounced in day number 1, and then your season's over where you're not even getting invited to an NIT or anything like that. But they've obviously blown everybody's expectations completely out of the water, and Coach Paris rightfully getting an extension to stick around here in Columbia for several more years, and it couldn't have come at a better time. And I do think that if there was no interest elsewhere, this is something that maybe would have waited for the end of the season. But the fact that you have the Ohio State job that is open, the Louisville job that just became open, there's a lot of connections for a guy like Coach Paris to those areas, because of course he's from Ohio originally, and coached in the Big Ten for a long time when he was under Bo Ryan at Wisconsin. So you can see the connections there, and just maybe wanting to get closer to home, and having connections to recruiting and all that kind of stuff in that area. So South Carolina saw it fit to go ahead and lock him up for the long term. has become official with a board of trustees meeting coming up here shortly where they will officially approve the contract. And, so a good start to the day for Coach Paris, who, again, is getting set to lead the Gamecocks into battle, taking on the Arkansas Razorbacks coming up in a little under an hour and a half, again, depending on what time LSU and Mississippi State wrap up there in the SEC opener for the day up there in Nashville. Speaking of Coach Paris, let's get into some things that he had to say after practice yesterday. Elijah Campbell and several other reporters caught up with him up there at Bridgestone Arena. We'll start off with cut number one here, Dave. Here's Coach Paris talking about what is the motivating factor for this team these days.
If you look at the Mississippi State game, I mean, hindsight's 20/20, but if you look at it, the result of that game probably didn't really affect the seeding for this tournament. And so, it's like a throwaway game. It's senior night for them. They felt like they really wanted it or needed it as far as their tournament eligibility. But our guys wanted to win. They just wanted to win. So at this point, motivation is not even a thing. Some coaches are great motivators, but I think at this point during the season, they have so many things that they're motivated by, and there are times where I've had to push buttons early in the season in order to get guys to do this or not do that. But at this point, they're so locked in and focused and motivating. I think they want to achieve. I think they recognize that what they've done is pretty special. It's the most regular season wins in school history. And I think they know that they've done some special things, but they're not satisfied with that. They want to continue to make this ride last as long as they possibly can. So there's a lot of motivation to continue to move forward and play well and play together and just get as many games together with this particular group as we possibly can.
I think this is a team that can be motivated by confidence at this point in time. Through roughly the first half of the season, we really talked up the angle that this team seemed to be presenting to itself of being disrespected from a national standpoint, or even a local standpoint, in a lot of ways when you talk about where they were projected to finish in the SEC. Say, hey, nobody thinks we're going to be able to do anything. All right, well, let's go blow through the non-conference slate and only lose a competitive game to Clemson. All right, okay, well, let's see what you do in conference play. Get into conference play, start beating good teams. You beat Kentucky. You beat Tennessee on the road, something that literally nobody had done in the past couple of years. Saying, all right, now this team's legit. And up at that point, they still weren't getting ranked. They still weren't getting the same love from the national pundits around the country. And they continued to have that chip on their shoulder, which was another motivating factor, and motivating factor, and motivating factor. And finally, when they started getting that national attention, they said, okay, well, now we're going to go out there and prove them we're not a fluke. Prove them we're not a flash in the pan. Prove to them that this isn't a one-week story. This is something you're going to have to talk about for weeks and weeks and months as the season rolls along. And it absolutely has been. Yeah, they've had some not great moments, losing by 40 to Vanderbilt and blowing a 16-point lead to LSU the following game. That's where a lot of us around here were like, oh, wait a minute now. Are we starting to trend in the wrong direction? Is this where the things kind of starts to go off the rails? They got themselves back on track, wrapped up the regular season strong, even in the one loss that they had towards the end of the regular season to Tennessee. A very competitive game, a high-emotion game, one that went back and forth, one that they were in at the very end of it. Ended up coming up a little bit short to what is legitimately one of the best teams in the entire country and one that we expect to be one of the top 4 seeds when next weekend's NCAA tournament does roll around. So all these different motivating factors, but I believe at this point in time, standing here an hour or so away from starting their SEC tournament play, I think this team's just motivated by knowing how good they are. I think they can look around and say, look what we've accomplished this year. A historic regular season for the history of this program with a team of guys that came from here, there, and everywhere. And I bring that point up a lot, but there's never a guarantee when you bring in a bunch of guys from the transfer portal, especially guys that end up being the majority of your starters, that are going to be able to gel together, that they're going to be able to complement each other, that they're going to be able to work together in the way that this team has done. And again, you can see the confidence that this team's had building and building and building as the season's gone along. And now we get to this point where, again, they don't have pressure on them this weekend. Do we want to see them go through and win the whole thing and take home a trophy on Sunday? Absolutely. But if they don't, all their goals are still ahead of them. Because at the end of the day, the most important thing, and Ray brought this up when we had him on the Love Chevrolet phone lines earlier, talking about projections and expectations for this team in the postseason, even if they don't win anything this weekend, they're still going to be in the NCAA tournament, which is the ultimate goal. And they've shown the ability to play with and be able to beat some of the best teams in the country. And guess what? If you want to make it through the NCAA tournament, that's what you're going to have to do. And I have the utmost belief that they can do that. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say, yeah, I think they're going to win the national championship. They could, and that'd be great, and we'd love it. But, I mean, if you told me, hey, they win 2 games, get bounced in the Sweet 16, that's reasonable and could happen. Or they can make a run to the Final Four for all we know. That's what makes the tournament itself so exciting. That's what makes following a team like this that's shown you that ability week in and week out so exciting, because you never really know where that ceiling is. And they're going to have the opportunity to go out there and put that on full display over the course of hopefully the next couple of weeks between both the SEC tournament and the NCAA tournament as well. Speaking of that confidence, it all relates back to team chemistry, as I just mentioned. Cut number 3 here, Dave. Here is Coach Paris talking about people taking notice of that chemistry.
Honestly, a lot of people have asked about it, but more people have just acknowledged it. I can't tell you how many people have acknowledged it. People that don't coach, just how many people say how fun it is to watch our guys play out there, just interact. When timeouts get called, the guys that don't even get in the games, it's a ridiculous amount of text messages that people acknowledge that. So it's, you're around them every day, so you at one point you noticed that it was good, but you're around them every single day through 100 and how many ever practices we've had at this point, and 30 some games. So you take some things for granted, but you get reminders all the time on just how they interact and how they play.
And it takes a good coach to make that possible. It takes a coach that builds a good program, that builds a good camaraderie with his players to be able to make that team chemistry happen. Because if the leadership at the top isn't there, and if it's not trickling down, your players aren't going to have that same chemistry. And from everything that we've heard, these guys love Coach Paris, and they've kind of almost taken on his personality in a way, which I think goes a long way, especially when you're talking about a veteran group of guys that can keep a calm demeanor, that can not get too high, not get too low. And you especially need that when you're talking about a tournament type of setting like they're dealing with over the course of these next couple of weeks. So fantastic job this season. Obviously, through the regular season, setting the record with 25 wins. I think we're all excited to see what the postseason is going to look like again, getting started in a little over an hour's time, taking on Arkansas up there at Bridgestone Arena, which, again, pregame coverage is going to start here at the top of the hour at 3 o'clock, and they'll lead you right up into whatever tip time was because, again, you got to wait until everything finishes up with LSU and Mississippi State first. Earlier on this morning on the Extra Point, the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs, myself, Wes, and Chris talked to Anthony Christensen from Whole Hog Sports, who's in attendance at the tournament this week, and gave us a little bit of perspective on this Arkansas basketball team. We'll replay that conversation for you coming up next. It is the Halftime Show. Tyler Head with you on this Thursday on The Game. All right, welcome back in. It's the halftime show. Going to rejoin the conversation we had earlier on this morning with Anthony Christian from Whole Hog Sports, previewing this afternoon's matchup between the Gamecocks and the Razorbacks. Started off by asking him about last night's game between the Razorbacks and the Commodores, where Arkansas nearly escaped with the win.
Yeah, Arkansas was not very good in that first half. I don't think that's anything to any surprise when you say that. But when you look at the second half, they did some different things defensively. They went more of a high pressure system and all that. And then obviously they got Caleb Battle the ball more. He hadn't had a field goal in the first half, and he finishes with 24 points after overtime, of course. And then Tremont Mark really got it going as well. All 18 of his points were in the second half. So when you look at those are the two guys you really need to get going if you're Arkansas. Caleb Battle and Tremont Mark, those are the guys, especially recently with Caleb Battle, who have been, their go-to guys to get the points. And then when you look at the defensive scheme as well, what was different in the second half is, they caused a 5-second violation, on the first, inbound to the half with Vanderbilt. So when you go to that high-pressure system against a team like Vanderbilt, that really caused them some issues, especially early in the half, and that was kind of the big thing that turned it around. And Arkansas had some trouble in the second half breaking through the press. Obviously, they turned it over on the inbounds, and that's what kind of got the game into overtime. But, when you look at that second half, I think the biggest things are, getting the ball in Caleb Battle's hands and Tremont Mark's hands, and that, added stuff.
Anthony, Chris Clark here. Thanks for joining us here today on the program. You mentioned that change, and everybody noticed that, that Arkansas kind of went to that high-pressure system, extended the defense out. Simple question, why not do that earlier? And then is this something that they've thrived in when they've done it all season? For context, here at South Carolina, they've sometimes employed a 1-3-1 zone defense that they've thrown at opponents in the middle of a game that's really kind of confused them and helped them. Seems like, is it maybe a similar situation for Arkansas with that high-press defense?
Yeah, so actually Arkansas has kind of struggled when they've tried to do that throughout the season. Eric Musselman kind of talked about it. After the game, they haven't really, played a defensive system like that throughout the season because they haven't really done it very well. But when you go into halftime down by 14 points or whatever it was, and you're kind of desperate to get back into it, you kind of I guess throw conventional wisdom out the window, right? So they made that change and they played really well, especially at the beginning of the half. They went on a big run to tie it up, and their defense is a big part of that. Trevin Brazil had a big defensive game, 4 blocks, 2 steals. Even Mekhi Mitchell in the paint, obviously, he had 3 blocks and 2 steals as well. Their defensive pressure in general, just that was some of the better defense that they've played, in that stretch that I've seen that covered the team this season. Obviously, kind of fell apart a little bit there at the end, allowed Vanderbilt to get back into it and force overtime. But when you look at the beginning of the second half, that was something that we really haven't seen that much.
Do we still got you?
Yep. Can you hear me?
Oh no, he's still there. Go ahead.
We still got him. I was going to say I listened to Musselman talk on the SEC Network broadcast right after the game, and he went ahead and gave a little preview sort of on what we might see today, and he was talking about how, hey, the South Carolina team, they probably feel like they're a better squad than they were when these two teams played earlier. But he also said, I feel like my guys have come a long way since South Carolina won at Arkansas earlier this year. So when you kind of look back at how this team has improved or just changed, what would you say is the biggest difference for this Arkansas group now compared to what maybe South Carolina fans saw in terms of South Carolina's opponent when these two teams played earlier this year?
Well, I think the easy answer to that question is, the improved performances of Caleb Battle and Mekhi Mitchell. Both those guys played fewer than 5 minutes in the first game that these two teams played against each other, and now Mekhi Mitchell is still coming off the bench, but he's the sixth man, and he's putting in a lot of really good performances lately, and Caleb Battle has really taken on the role of primary scorer, and neither of those guys played more than 5 minutes the first time And what you see with those guys, especially when they're on the court together, I mean, it's a lethal pick and roll game when you have, Mekhi Mitchell, in that rolling spot and Caleb Battle with the ball in his hands. So, I mean, that's been the biggest difference, I think, when you look at, that game versus now, is just how much that's changed. Obviously, Caleb Battle's kind of replaced Devo Davis in that starting five, and Mekhi Mitchell's kind of taken on that six-man role. So that's really, at least offensively, the biggest thing that I've noticed. And I think everybody who follows Arkansas has noticed that if you look at Caleb Battle and, how much he's been scoring. There was a 4-game stretch where he scored 141 points. That was the most points of, any SEC player for the last 20 seasons. So when you got a guy who's, playing to that level, obviously something is done right and change some stuff up. And, yeah, that's the biggest difference between these two teams, and something that, I'm sure, obviously, how critical a coach Lamont Harris has been. If I had a vote, he would have been my national coach of the year. Obviously, got that well-deserved extension this morning. That's something I'm sure he's been watching and prepping for. And yeah, no, that's the biggest thing that I've noticed is the improved play of Caleb Battle and Mekhi Mitchell.
Again, talking to Anthony Christensen from Whole Hog Sports, previewing today's matchup between South Carolina and Arkansas. Speaking of coaches, looking at Eric Musselman, this season was obviously not great in conference play, 6-12, but going in as a low seed, having to play yesterday. Something about him in tournaments, though. Obviously, the Sweet 16 a year ago, despite being under 500, the two Elite Eights. Before that, what is it about these tournament settings and environments that really brings out the best in Coach Musselman?
I think it's, when you look at him, it's kind of adjustments, especially, at halftime, like we mentioned, switching to that higher pressure, defensive system, or, getting the ball in Caleb Battle's hands more, finding a way to do that, because obviously Caleb Battle's going to be the first name on any scouting report right now. I think it's really just an adjustment, in those kinds of times, that has really made him, one of the better tournament coaches in the country. Obviously, this season hasn't gone to plan for them. It's obviously the below 500 record and everything along those lines. But like you said, he's built up this tournament reputation, and he's always been, a tournament guy. Even going back to his time at Nevada, obviously beat Cincinnati, that they talked about a lot last night, and made a couple of really good runs, there in Nevada. But I think the biggest thing that I've noticed, since covering this team is how he's able to adjust, when the game plan doesn't work. That's been, I think, the biggest key to, Arkansas's success in tournaments in recent years.
Hey, Anthony, watching the game at home last night, man, I was a little bit struck by just how good the crowd and the atmosphere was. What do you think it says about the growth of basketball in the SEC that a day one game between two of the lower seeds was sort of just so highly attended and just had it actually almost had like an NCAA tournament feel to it watching at home. I think that says a lot just about the interest in SEC basketball now and the depth of the talent within the programs in this league now.
Yeah, that and the Missouri-Georgia game, too. But, I mean, I think it just really speaks to the growth of the SEC as a basketball conference, particularly in men's basketball. I mean, you look at, this Arkansas team was ranked preseason top 15 in both the AP and coaches' polls. And obviously Vanderbilt gets a little bit of a boost because it's there in Nashville. I think less than 3 miles from Vanderbilt's campus. But when you look at, just the level of play in the SEC, it's one of the best conferences in the country this season, if not the best by some metrics. And I think that kind of goes from bottom to top and vice versa. When you look at the quality of, players on each of these teams, even Missouri has a guy who, is probably an all-conference level player in Sean East. So you've got, quality players, quality coaches, from the top to the bottom. And, especially in recent years, that's something that, has really kind of grown and taken off in the SEC. going back from my time covering the SEC as a student to now, I mean, you can just kind of see, the emphasis the league has put on men's basketball, firstly, and just how much success they've seen in that.
Again, that was our conversation a little bit earlier on with Anthony Christensen of Whole Hog Sports, giving us a preview of this afternoon's matchup between the Gamecocks and the Arkansas Razorbacks. We'll come back, hit the greatest day in the history of the world as the halftime show rolls along on your Thursday here on The Game. Welcome back in. It's the halftime show. Tyler Head along with you. A couple more minutes to go, going until the top of the hour when we turn things over to the Gamecock Sports Network, getting you set for men's basketball taking on Arkansas in right about an hour's time. Let's take a quick peek here at the scoreboard, see how things are progressing with LSU and Mississippi State. Mississippi State's actually grabbed the lead back. They have a 42-38 lead right now with 11 minutes to go in the second half. That leads me to believe that South Carolina and Arkansas are probably not going to start on time if there's still 11 minutes to play in a very tight ball game between Mississippi State and LSU. But again, whenever they do tip off, we'll have it for you right here on the game. And if they end up winning today, and that means they'll play tomorrow, we'll have that for you once again, with the 3 o'clock pregame and a 3:30 tip-off against Auburn. Again, should South Carolina win today against Arkansas. It is indeed time for the greatest day in the history of the world. We'll start back in 1954. Milwaukee Brewers in spring training started a player for the first time in his career by the name of Hank Aaron. Hank Aaron would have been 20 years old at that point in time, I believe. Let's see. He was born, he would have just, Milwaukee Braves, not the Brewers. He would have just turned 20 about a month before, got his first career start in a spring training game with the Milwaukee Braves. They were taking on the Boston Red Sox in that game. They had him out there in left field. It says here that Bobby Thompson had fractured his ankle sliding into second the day before during another spring training game, which allowed them to give Hank Aaron the nod. He proceeded to hit a home run in that game, which should not come as a surprise to many people. And obviously that home run did not count towards his total of 700 and 755, but was one of just many, many ones that he hit over the course of his professional baseball career. Go a couple years later to 1960. Philadelphia center Wilt Chamberlain sets the NBA playoff record of 53 points in the Warriors' 132-112 victory over the Syracuse Nationals out at the Philadelphia Civic Center. You know, it's really funny. Terry and I do the greatest day in the history of the world every single weekday at 2:30, and without fail, from roughly, I'd say, the middle of December all the way through to now, it seems like Wilt Chamberlain pops up at least once, if not every single day, at least 2 to 3 times a week, if we're being completely honest. Just the dude set an unreal amount of records in NBA history, and I'm just scrolling through. I'm scrolling through this page, and it is taking me many seconds to go from the top to the bottom of it, of just about every single record that he set over the course of his NBA career. Truly remarkable, obviously one of the all-time greats. But that 53-point mark was set back in 1960, and it has been surpassed several times since then, including once by Wilt Chamberlain himself 2 years later. So this would pop up on the greatest day in the history of the world next Friday. So sorry to go ahead and give the tease away, but he set a 56-point mark on March the 22nd, 1962, also against the Syracuse Nationals. That victory was a 121-104 affair. Again, 56 points, which currently has him tied for 4th all-time in points in a playoff game. The 53-point mark, it has him tied for 17th all-time with Jerry West, Isaiah Thomas, and Nikola Jokic, who did it just this past year in the playoffs in the Western Conference semifinals against Phoenix. So he slotted in at tied for 4th all-time with the 56-point performance that he had 2 years later. That is tied with Michael Jordan, Charles Barkley, and Jimmy Butler. Jimmy Butler doing his last year as well in the Eastern Conference first round with the Heat against the Milwaukee Bucks. And if you want to take a wild guess at who's sitting at the top of the scoring record in a playoff game for the NBA, yes, of course, it is Michael Jordan. Did it back in April of '86 in the Eastern Conference first round against the Boston Celtics. Dropped 63 points in that game. So that is a mark that we'll see if it gets touched. Closest one in recent memory has been Donovan Mitchell, who did it back in 2020 in August, because, again, the the schedule was screwy that year because they were in the bubble. But he dropped 57 points against the Nuggets in the Western Conference first round. So not impossible. We've seen these guys get close, and especially with the high scoring that we see in the NBA today, it's not out of the realm of possibility of that record potentially getting shattered somewhere down the road. But again, when you look up any record books, you're obviously going to see Michael Jordan there, but you'll see plenty of Wilt Chamberlain there as well. And finally, to 1987, Darryl Strawberry charges Red Sox pitcher Al Nipper during a spring training game, causing a bench clearing brawl. Now, I attempted to find the footage of this, and maybe it's out there, and if it is, and I don't know where to look for it, please send it my way. 803-404-6100. I couldn't find it because Darryl Strawberry had gotten in so many fights in his professional baseball career, it probably got lost in the shuffle. And again, this was a spring training game, so it's very likely there was just no cameras rolling when this thing happened. But Darryl Strawberry in quite a few altercations over the course of his career, this one occurring very early on in spring training with Red Sox pitcher Al Nipper back in 1987. So again, I haven't been able to find the video footage of it. If you know of where I can find that, please let me know. 803-404-6100. But that is indeed the greatest day in the history of the world. Hopefully, we're talking about today being the greatest day in the history of the world for South Carolina and the men's basketball team as they start their postseason play against the Arkansas Razorbacks. Hopefully today's victory can be the starting off point of what is a very, very successful run through the through the postseason of not only the SEC tournament but the NCAA tournament as well over the course of these next couple weeks. And again, sky's the limit. You never know what this team's going to be capable of. They've shown the ability to play with just about everybody they've gone toe to toe with, and Arkansas is going to be no different. And first of hopefully many teams they're able to advance past over the course of the next couple of weeks in postseason play. We'll come back, hit our Firehouse Subs text of the hour, and wrap up the day getting you set for pregame coverage between the Gamecocks and the Razorbacks coming up right here on the Halftime Show on The Game. Welcome back in. Halftime show. Tyler Head rolling solo for a couple more minutes here. Captain Dave producing on the other side of the glass. Same situation coming up tomorrow. Going to be flying solo. Terry Ford expected to be back with me come Monday morning. And hopefully this time tomorrow, we're getting you set for another South Carolina men's basketball game. At that point in time, they'd be taking on the Auburn Tigers, rematching what happened a couple weeks back where they got beaten pretty badly out there at Neville Arena by 40 points. So hopefully South Carolina can get past Arkansas today and have that opportunity to maybe get some revenge on Auburn in the quarterfinals of the SEC tournament. Quick update on game number 1 going on right now at the Bridgestone Arena. Have a LSU, Mississippi State currently leads 52-45. There is, according to my clock here, 7.5 minutes to go in that one. As I mentioned, I don't expect this game to end at 3 o'clock as anticipated. So first tip for South Carolina and Arkansas may be around 3:40 or 3:45, just depending on when this one does indeed wrap up. And it may run into a situation like last night, where the first game ends up going to overtime, and gosh, Georgia Missouri didn't tip off till maybe close to 9:45 last night. So certainly a lot later than expected for that game. So thankfully South Carolina is playing one of the earlier games today, so we don't have to stay up super late to watch them tip off at 9:45 or something like that. So in regards to them being a 5 seed, I am at least thankful for that part of it. Time for our Firehouse Subs text of the hour. I posed the question earlier on in the show. What is your level of expectation? Where do you think this team can go over the course of the NCAA tournament? And is there any bar that's too low that maybe you look back and say, well, that was a waste of a season because they didn't accomplish X, Y, or Z? GM weighing in and says, Lamont Paris has us where we should be. I want us to regularly make the dance year in, year out. I think this team is good enough for Sweet 16 this year. 25-win season cannot be taken away, even with a first-round loss. What a great team. Hoping all of those accolades coach is getting makes the recruiting all the better as well. And that's a good way to look at it. And, as we've talked about so much, this is kind of one of those seasons where I really hope you're trying to live in the moment and enjoy it as it's happening instead of something you're just going to be able to look back on down the road, because it's truly special. And again, the hope and the expectation is that Lamont Paris is leading this team on this great future path of being regularly at the top of the SEC, regularly in the NCAA tournament, if not guaranteed to be in on a year in, year out basis, and making deep runs when they do ultimately end up making the tournament. And again, we don't know. We can't predict the future. As we saw, last season with Missouri, they made the tournament in Dennis Gates' first year. They didn't win a flipping conference game the entire year, including last night, losing that one to Georgia in the late minutes of that one. So it can change so quickly, and especially in the era of the transfer portal and all that kind of stuff. This stuff is so very fluid in the world of college basketball. You just never truly know. Now, again, we all believe, and Coach Paris was signed to an extension because there's a belief that he's going to be able to keep this team at the top of the mountain, or at least near the top of the mountain in the SEC for years and years to come. Again, all that stuff we'll be worried about when we get there, when we get next season, the off season, and all that kind of stuff. There's still basketball to be played. As of right now, this team has already set a record for the most wins in the regular season. Let's see what it can do in the postseason. Starting off today with Arkansas coming up in a little less than an hour's time, probably for first tip of that game. Just take it one game at a time. Truly enjoy the experience. Truly savor every moment, because you don't know when it's going to end. And if it ends next week in the first round of the NCAA tournament, or it ends all the way in Phoenix in the Final Four, whatever level of accomplishment this team has, I hope as a fan base you can all enjoy it and marinate in it and appreciate it while you have it, and look back upon it fondly once you've moved on down the line to the next season and the next season as well. Speaking of enjoying the experience, cut number 11 here, Dave. Here's Michi Johnson yesterday talking to the media after practice about just trying to enjoy the experience themselves.
Have fun. I mean, for these seniors, some of these guys, we never get this opportunity back. We'll never get this time back with each other. So we like to have fun, enjoy the moment, because, we'll go back years from now, look at these videos of us dancing and, laughing with each other and doing all crazy stuff on the court. But that's what basketball is about. So, you're going to be serious when the lights come on, when that buzzer go on, but you got to be able to have fun with the game.
And I think we've seen that so much this year with the camaraderie this team has. And I even go back to the other week when they lost that game against Tennessee, which was on senior night here at Colonial Life Arena, where they were honoring B.J. Mack. They were honoring Talon Cooper. They were honoring Stephen Clark, these guys that have been such vital pieces to the success of this team this year. And obviously ended up losing that game, a hard-fought game, tooth and nail fight that South Carolina unfortunately came up a little bit short in. But you saw the videos of Michi Johnson, who was visibly emotional. And, it wasn't really from the standpoint of just losing the game. As we heard after the game with Talon Cooper talking to the media, he was upset that he did not send the seniors out in their final game at Colonial Life Arena on a win. And I think that, again, kind of speaks volumes to the, where this team is at and how everybody is kind of on equal footing there. Nobody's greater than anybody else. And even when Michi Johnson can go out there and drop 25 some odd points in the game, that does not automatically mean he's the top dog in the locker room or something like that. These guys play for each other. They play as a team, and they play for the team itself. And I think that goes a long way, especially when you're talking about these tournament type of environments where, you're having these games on back-to-back days, and there's a quick turnaround time. There's swings, and you may have a bad game one day and a good game the next. And if this is a team that was built off of the performance of one player, then that doesn't always end up working out when you get into a tournament. But the fact that everybody on this team has the ability to contribute in a variety of ways, score in a variety of ways, get rebounds, all that kind of stuff, steals, blocks, you name it, this team can do it across the board. And hopefully, again, that will go a very long way when we're talking about this team as far as tournament play. You can't discount Eric Musselman. As I talked about with Elijah a little bit earlier, this is a guy that knows how to coach well in tournaments. He's done it before. Last year's Arkansas team was sub 500 in conference play, and they still made it all the way to the Sweet 16. So something about the adjustments and those quick turnarounds just play into the favor of the way that Eric Musselman runs his team. So something to look out for today, that yes, Arkansas is probably going to be a little more gassed after that game last night where they had to play an additional 5 minutes just to get into this game and had a less than 24-hour turnaround, which are positive things for South Carolina. But again, for a team and a program like Arkansas that seems to thrive in those environments, you can never be too careful. I personally think that South Carolina should be able to pick up the victory today, but Arkansas is definitely going to make them work for it. I think it's going to be a good game regardless. I don't think it's going to be a blowout one way or the other. South Carolina is certainly going to have to work for it if they want to advance on into the quarterfinals of the SEC tournament. And hopefully they do. And hopefully tomorrow, all day long, we're going to be able to talk about what a great win tonight was and be able to, look ahead to that rematch with Auburn, where, again, South Carolina would be looking to avenge their legitimately worst loss of the season that came on the road in Neville Arena a couple of weeks back. So regardless, time to lock in. Again, coming up in just a few minutes is Derek Scott and Judge Manning for the pregame show, and taking you right up to tip-off time around 3:30. Again, it's pretty fluid when you talk about these tournament games, and I'm excited to see what happens. Excited to see Lamont Paris, the newly soon-to-be paid Lamont Paris. I guess the check probably hasn't cleared yet, but the new contract Lamont Paris taking his team into the SEC tournament up there in Nashville. Dave, fine job as always. Be back at it tomorrow, flying solo from noon until 3. Coming up next, South Carolina men's basketball here on The Game.